Hello, people. Welcome to the community of the Growth Mindset podcast. Guys, if you are a first time listener, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're listening from so that you don't miss on more interesting episodes coming up in following weeks. And for our daily listeners, here we are again with a new episode where we will interview another interesting personality from a unique industry and understand how they were able to accomplish this great level of success. Remember, this is a podcast where we learn easy, practical methods and tips that we can implement in our daily lives from the very best and the most successful people known today. Because as we all know, success leaves clues. And we, the people having the growth mindset, will use these clues to create a better, more fulfilling, and a successful life. So, let the growth begin. Thank you so much for taking your time out and joining me on the Growth Mindset podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much, man. And I love the name of your show. And yeah, I remember 5 years ago when I didn't even know what a growth mindset was. So it's awesome.
Yep. Now, Mark, would you like to go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself? Basically, just give a quick insight as to what's your background like, where you're from, for people who might not know you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from the East Coast of America, and my parents came to America from Egypt. They immigrated, and had a very kind of simple childhood. My parents came to this country with $200 in their pocket. Just remember just having a very, very simple childhood. We moved around a lot. We didn't necessarily live in the best communities. But as I got older, I just really began to, fall down my own problems, just like everyone. For me, I faced a tremendous amount of racism. I remember growing up in a region, in a school where I was the only person who was not American, who was not white. And so I faced a lot of that. And then also facing a lot of, economic instability of my background taught me a lot on like how to be an entrepreneur. And so really, when I look back at my life, it's super, super interesting, many ups, many downs. But ultimately it has led me here. And, honestly, I do so many different things, but they're really all tied through, exponential growth from the perspective of, when I was 15, 16 years old, I ended up starting a pretty successful business, just like from my laptop at home. And I've always really always become an entrepreneur after that. And that really taught me the power of how to use technology to, change your life, to change your family's life, your socioeconomic background. As I got older, I had my own, a lot of people call them like mental health struggles. I think there's a lot of stigma that comes with that. And so I call them brain health struggles. And so I faced a lot of that, and really what I've really gotten to the conclusion of, I try, for me, all my messaging, the message that I'm trying to bring to the world is to have, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual freedom. And so that comes with, making sure you take care of the things that are invisible to you, like your brain, your heart, but then also, bringing that on the outside and trying to create something too. And so long story short, I host a podcast. It's called Humans 2.0. It's also very popular like yours. I'm on an Amazon Prime documentary series called The Social Movement. I run a business. I'm in the middle of starting a nonprofit. Wow. I sit on a board of education nonprofit. I'm a speaker. I'm also an author of this book I came out with in March. Yes. And so honestly, I do a lot of different things, but they all come through the same line of empowering people to change things that are either invisible to them, like their mental health, or
Yep.
things that are visible to them, and, making money, and how do you create a movement, your brand,
Correct.
things like that. And so these two come hand in hand. And, I remember once upon a time in my life where I was making like hundreds of thousands of dollars at a young age, but yet I was still depressed. I was obese. I had many different kinds of health issues. I've had people on my podcast, from billionaires to the co-founder of Netflix, who have
Mm-hmm.
told me, like, you know, they had like $500 million in their bank account, but yet they were suicidal and depressed.
Wow.
And so, just like my own experience, learning from a lot of smarter people from me, I've just learned that, like, a lot of people talk about like entrepreneurship, a lot of people talk about like mindset, but I think it's really a combination of those things, because it's like, what do you do with your mindset? People don't just want a positive growth mindset just for
True.
the sake of being happy all the time. They want to actually do something with it. And even if you are happy all the time, but you're by yourself, I mean, you're not really
Exactly.
doing the world a service. And so I try to explore this conversation in everything I do, whether it's my podcast, my book,
Mm-hmm.
my course, my business, my speaking, my everything. So
And
I know
how
it's a very
old
long
are
answer,
you?
but
No, that's nice. And how old are you?
I'm turning 23.
23 years, and you're doing a ton of work already. I mean, like, isn't that exciting in the first place? Now, imagine 20 years from now where you're going to be. I know I asked you the question in the beginning of the interview itself, wherein how old were you? But the reason I asked you that question is so that people can understand 23 and you're still hustling, so that people can understand, that, things like this, everybody is a victim. One or the other way, somebody is suffering from something that we don't know. No matter how much money they might have, wealth they might have, how happy they might be looking from the outside, but the things that are invisible or invisible are the things that most of us suffer, and that never comes out. And you and I, people
Truth.
like us, spreading awareness about these so that people can understand and know that these things can be worked upon. And you're a classic example of this, right? You mentioned that when you came back from the Egypt to the United States, you were a victim of bullying in school, racism in school, right? There are a lot of people out there today as well who are a victim of this, right? So
Mm.
what would your advice be to these young kids or teenagers who are a victim of bullying or sexual abuse, or obese or depression? What is your advice? What can they do to protect themselves from these?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to give you the big picture, a lot of the times, things like, bullying and abuse and whatnot, whether it's from kids your age or your parents or your teachers, it can happen to anyone by anyone.
Correct.
A lot of the times this seems like quite a harmless problem in society. We're like, oh, hey, so what? Someone says something to you, just ignore them, just, do whatever it takes. And so I think that's fine. But I think the reality is that oftentimes what ends up happening is that people who experience something at a young age, from, ages 3 to like 11, 12, 13, a lot of times what happens is they experience that, and oftentimes their nervous system, their psychology, what's growing with the kid, is
Mhm.
often very much shaped by that. And a lot of the times what you see is that 10 years down the road, the problem is still there, even if that kid is now a grown adult and it comes out in a different way. And it's
Correct.
not because, these kids are like more sensitive these days. It's not because, kids need to toughen up, and like, adults or my parents tell us, like, back in our day, we saw like war and stuff, and like, oh, and so I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing that we need to understand is just like how important it is, that these things they're not just like these random problems. They are things that can really stay with someone throughout
Mm.
their entire life. And so, if someone was going through it right now, obviously what I would say is, if you're a victim of anything like extremely serious, like sexual assault or anything like that, um, and you live in a society or you live in a world where you can report that, obviously go ahead and do that. But I know that's quite difficult. And honestly, what I would say is that, looking back at it, I'm so grateful all these things happened to me, obviously, because they made me into who I am.
Yep.
And they really did kind of give me my superpowers. And there's no way that, a 22-year-old would be doing this stuff if he didn't have it. And like really what this is like, this is the human story. And what I mean is, like, I don't know if Batman is popular in India or what. I assume so, maybe not.
He is very popular.
Okay, good. So you look at the story of Batman. You have someone who, he started off as a kid, Bruce Wayne. He saw his parents get murdered in front of him. He starts to have like all of these mental health issues with like depression. And then he's like, you know what? Screw it. As he gets older, he's like rich and famous. He's got his parents' money. And he's like, hey, I'm going to put on this Batman suit and I'm going to go out and I'm going to beat the crap out of people. And I'm going to defend people who I don't even know. And so a lot of times, this is the human story. You're growing up, you face some sort of terrible thing that shouldn't have happened to you. And then, you might spend 10 years in the negative aspect of that, being depressed, having severe anxiety, not being able to control it, putting yourself in the not so great situations. But then you start to learn things. You start to learn like, oh, wait, I can actually take this raw energy that my brain is automatically telling me is bad, and I can start to take that and use that to fuel me forward. And like the reality is that, I have friends who have gone through not that many issues. Obviously everyone has problems, everyone has gone through issues, but I have friends who have not had a lot of issues, and they'll tell me this themselves. And the reality is that they don't have any superpowers.
True.
And that's just the truth. And so a lot of the times in our society, in our community, we are told, if you have a life where your parents are rich, you have no problems, everyone is nice to you, then you'll grow up and you'll be successful. And I've definitely seen that happen too. I have friends who, their parents are extremely rich, but they raised them right and they're doing what they want to be doing. However, the opposite side to this is, you come from nothing. Everywhere you go, people call you a loser. People don't respect you. People hate you. People start insulting you. People don't like you. You have no friends. You try to do something and you fail 16 times. You get lost for a decade of your life. And what happens is usually a lot of people will emerge after that unbelievably more successful than the person who had no issues, that society says, oh, this is what it looks like to have success, when in reality it's really people who have come from the mud. True. That are able to create themselves. And every single person on my podcast, for the most part, has had like the most terrible problems happen to them, but now they're doing amazing things. And so if you're going through it right now, obviously, if it's extremely serious, you need to report it. You need to make sure nothing too dangerous happens. And then you need to realize that this is the cycle of life. And I think if you understand that, then your attention, your focus shifts. And you're able to be like, okay, I know this is going to happen. So what then happens is, I think you begin to reflect and you begin to say, like, if this is the way that it is, if these are like the rules of life, let me accept these rules and then take responsibility for what I can control now. I can't control what other people are going to say about me, but I can't control what I say to people. And so you begin to look at it from that perspective, because the reality is, the last thing I'll say is, so many people that are in this mentality that have gone through bullying, racism, abuse, you essentially hold the belief in your head that other people are controlling you and your life. And if other people are controlling your life, you're never going to be happy, because you need to be in control of your own life.
True.
And so I think for me, I remember when I was 18 years old and I was actually depressed, obese, and I was actually suicidal. I remember going on these long walks. And I remember on these long walks, I began to find out that my brain had been repeating a lot of negative thoughts to me, had been constantly trying to pull me down, telling me, Mark, you're a loser, you suck, no one likes you, all this stuff going on in the background, whether it was clear, as in I could hear it, or whether it was just silent and it was invisible underneath the surface. And I remember realizing that a lot of those negative thoughts, a lot of those things that were causing me a lot of harm, those weren't even my thoughts. These thoughts weren't even mine. These thoughts had been placed in my mind from the time when I was bullied when I was younger. Because this is the thing that I've learned. Your brain's number one job is not to keep you happy. Your brain's number one job is to keep you to survive. And so when you look at evolution, you look at the way biology works, any information that is negative is more important than positive information. Due to survival, if you ignore the wrong thing, that may put you in danger. And so when you're a kid and you're going through this, if you keep hearing things again and again and again, whether that's from your parents, your family, your friends, people at school, your boss, anyone, your brain is going to pick up that information and it's going to store it. And then it's going to repeat it in your own voice. And then you're going to be like, wait, these thoughts, these beliefs, these aren't even mine. And so that's what causes a lot of teenagers, a lot of young adults to just go through life very confused, not really understanding. And so if you're able to understand what I said there of like, this is natural, this is the human story, this is Batman, this is the Batman story, but it's up to you on how you change it. Are you going to sit down? Are you going to get drunk all the time and like Bruce Wayne in his mansion and ignore your problems? Or are you going to get out there and try to not only help yourself, but also help other people? And then just realize more on like the psychology, the neuroscience, because it can definitely help someone's perspective a lot to not just take it so personally, right? Because, I remember when I was younger and someone was racist to me or said something insulting, I always took it so personally. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that to me. And like, I was always a nice guy. So I was just like, wait, why would they say that to me? It doesn't make any sense. And like, especially something like racism, I don't really understand racism. I don't understand how you can judge someone based on a different color, than they're at. So that doesn't make much sense. But I remember going through that and just taking it so personally, taking it so to heart. I'm like, oh my God. But then as you grow up, you realize the people who are bullying are people who have been bullied. The people who abuse people are people who have been abused. And like, dude, I've literally gotten Facebook messages from people who used to bully me and be racist to me when I was younger from school, message me now, and they literally would tell me like, I'm so sorry for what I did. My dad was actually an alcoholic and he'd beat the crap out of me every night, and I would take that out on you. And so I think if you look at it from that perspective, it just helps you not take it as personally. And you really begin to realize that, anyone who attacks you is just a victim. They're hurt, but they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to cope with it, And so that's what I would say. I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. And it's, as you said, right, before we even began the conversation, you were talking about, we all like stories, right? End of the day, we all like stories of empowerment, like the underdog when he rises to the top. So if you compare, if you give a statistics to people, telling them to choose a person who has no issues and has amazing parents, amazing lifestyle, versus a person who had tons of issues, a lot of problems, but then he rises to success, and people tend to like the underdog more because he has been able to achieve something that was not given to him, right? And then the second point, which you mentioned, right, about accepting, let's say somebody's getting bullied, then accepting the fact that, okay, fine, this is how life is. And maybe the person who is bullying you or who is trying to, take advantage of you may have some, psychological issue. He might be a victim from somebody else, and then he's trying to throw that shit on you. And then you accepting the fact, and then, thinking about what is there in his control and working on to make those things better, think people will be in much better position to take in charge of their lives, rather than compared to, as you mentioned, right, sitting at a mansion and drinking like how Bruce Wayne was. So either you
Yeah.
can go ahead, face your problems, or you can sit and think like you're a victim, and then you'll never be able to rise. So it's more
Yeah.
about taking charge of your life and making sure that you surround yourself with people that love and support you. And even if they don't, I mean, it's you who can actually change your life, nobody else, end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. And, one more thing that I would add on to that is like, for me, whenever I remember, it's so strange to look back at now because
Mm-hmm.
I'm like so, I'm like so detached to who I was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think when I was growing up, whenever I would experience anxiety, I didn't know it was anxiety.
Mm.
And so all of a sudden I would just be living life. And then all of a sudden my mind would start to like take me down the spiral of like, it would start off with something small. It would be like,
Yeah.
Mark, did you finish your homework for
Mm.
class tomorrow? And then it'd be like, oh wait, no, I didn't. And then all of a sudden my heartbeat would start to
Mm.
increase. My breath would start to be more shallow. All of a sudden my thoughts would be like, they would just
Yeah.
start coming in fast and fast and fast. And then it would go to another thing. And then it would go into another thing. And then it would go to another thing. And then I would be like, oh my God, my life sucks. I'm such a terrible person. What am I going to do? And so I remember like that would happen like all the time. That was my
Mm.
life. But
Yeah.
the moment when I realized what anxiety was, which was really, this is a pattern of emotional responses that your brain has, that your mind has. Realizing what mental health was completely changed my life.
Mm.
And what I realized is like, I remember I would be in a classroom in school. And I remember, during attendance or during class, you would look around and you see all your classmates next to you. And the really interesting part about mental health is that we can only see things that people show us,
Mm.
right? So we can see the clothes that people wear. We can see people's facial expressions. Are they smiling? Are they not smiling?
True.
We can see, maybe their words if they choose to say them. And so a lot of the times we will be in a classroom or we'll be at work or we'll be wherever, and there will be people surrounded. And everyone will dress nice, they'll look nice, they'll have the nice hairstyles, everyone will be like smiling and like being awesome. And the reality is that this is the outside world. This is the external world. But when you take a look at the inside, I guarantee you, if you're sitting in the classroom of 25 people, I guarantee you there's going to be like 5 or 10 other kids who are literally having anxiety right now, but they've just been taught to just like smile through it and to pretend they're positive and happy. And so I think the biggest thing that really changed my perspective is understanding what mental health is. Rather than every time I get anxiety, I think of it more as a moral or an ethical issue of like, wow, I'm a terrible person for having these thoughts. It then just begins to go to like, oh, this is how the human mind works. I'm having a totally normal emotional response. Not everyone around me is totally normal. I'm sure they are also having their own issues, but that are just invisible. Like you can see someone's broken leg, you can see someone's broken arm, but you can't see somebody's broken mind.
Correct.
And so talking about mental health, destigmatizing mental health, and whether you want to call it mental health, your brain health, your mindset, whatever word you want to use to describe how your brain's emotional, mental, internal processes run is so important. And the reason why this is so important is because you can just measure this in countries where there is high stigma on mental health. There is a much, much, much higher suicide rate. There is a much, much higher depression rate. So for example, the Middle East, India, very high rates of suicide. Why? Because people don't talk about it.
True.
A guy your age, that's 27, 28, will have some sort of a problem, and then people will say like, oh, dude, just suck it up. Just toughen up. Just be a man,
Yeah.
And so when there is like this fundamental lack of being able to talk about this mental health, then people go where there is no return. People escape. And so, that's also part of my mission too. I'm trying to take what I've been doing, and I've been trying to push this more out in terms of people in the Middle East, in terms of India, in terms of countries where, and it's actually funny, right? So on a different note, I wrote a book called Screw Being Shy. It's all about social anxiety, people who can't talk to other people. I faced this for so many years. And you actually look at it, countries where, like, especially in the Middle East, places in Southeast Asia, much, much, much higher rates of shyness, social anxiety. And there are many factors due to that, but a major part of it is the culture, is a major part of it is people just don't talk about it, or they have certain words for dismissing it, or like, she's just not feeling well today, or she's tired, or she has to go take a nap, or whatever it is. I'm from the Middle East. They do the same exact thing. And so the more and more we talk about this, the more and more people feel like they are not being abandoned and just like shoved into a corner by society, where they don't kill themselves, where they do not use drugs and alcohol to escape, where they don't push other people and bully others. And so, that's also part of my mission too, because that's so important. So important.
True. And I love the part wherein you mentioned about the book as well, right? I've had a look at your book, Screw Being Shy. Now, can you tell us about that book? What is it all about, so that people who want to grab that book can have an idea as to what they can expect out of your book?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So, I honestly wrote my book because, so I'm a speaker. I get invited by companies, conferences, organizations. And, I usually talk about either like, how to be like influential online, how do you build a conscious following, or on the more mental health side as well. And so I think probably after every single time I went up to speak, I would have at least one person come up to me after, and like, they wouldn't make direct eye contact with me. They'd kind of be looking down. They'd be, I could tell they were just really nervous. Maybe they would call themselves an introvert or shy or quiet. And they would ask me, Mark, how did you go from someone who like literally couldn't talk to people to being able to, speak confidently on stage in front of like 1,000 people? And so I just kept on seeing that again and again and again. And I was really like, man, I have to write a book about this, because, I've read a lot of books about this topic, but to be honest with you, I don't think there's a single book out there that personally has the methods, the science, the perspectives, the real world examples that I mentioned in my book, that just makes it common sense for like the average person, whether they're a kid or a student or an adult, to pick up and read. That really just shows you, how do you go from someone who has always been labeled as shy, quiet, introvert, although you don't want to be. You have something that you want to say, but every time that you want to say something, it feels like your body, your brain is just holding you back. You feel like you want to talk, but you just can't. And so that's social anxiety. And I went through that for 10 years of my life. And it's brutal. It's brutal. And so this is such a major problem that I just felt like wasn't getting addressed. And so I was like, man, I got to write a book about this, Screw Being Shy, and get it out to as many people as possible. Okay. So,
now people who are, let's say, who have this social anxiety, who have a fear of going in front of a crowd and then talking, what would your advice be to them? How can they get rid of social anxiety, or people are introverted, to be able to go ahead and talk to other people? Any 3 practical advice that you have on top of your mind?
Yeah. So the first one is, there's no article, there's no podcast, there's no social media post that's going to give you just the best 3 tips to eliminate social anxiety and be the best networker and have ultimate confidence. And so, I think, I see a lot of like these confidence tips or networking tips. I think those are fine. I think those work for people who are just maybe a little bit quiet, and that's totally fine. But people who have social anxiety, shyness, personally for me, I try not to talk about, Band-Aid solutions, as in things that people can do on the shallow. I like to get down to the root. And so
Awesome.
if you want to get down to the root, this is what it is. So the first thing that people need to understand is that social anxiety is actually not your main problem.
Hmm.
Social anxiety is a symptom of you having psychological trauma from a young age. If you have
Hmm.
experienced some sort of a psychologically traumatic experience, many times, your brain will have social anxiety. And the reason why is because you are now in a, you know, something happened to you that essentially made your brain realize like, wow, people, like I need to pay more attention to people because what if somebody screws me over again, or what if somebody
Yeah.
hurts me again? And so your brain literally just becomes more sensitive, becomes more
Hmm.
elevated, and it's usually stuck like that for the rest of your life. And so a
Wow.
lot of the times people who experience psychological trauma, which is really everybody to a varying degree, it doesn't have to be some extremely like, serious thing
Hmm.
like you getting sexually abused or so on and so forth. A lot of the times, unless you experience some sort of another traumatic event or another transformative event, most people will probably never change. And
Hmm.
so number one is just understanding that social anxiety is just a symptom that appears
Hmm.
when there is a deeper problem that is happening. And so
Understood.
number two is that you have to heal your psychological trauma. And
Hmm.
so what I mean by this is like, the reason why human beings are human beings is because, if you look at an animal, for example, that's getting born, like if you look at a giraffe or
Hmm.
something, I don't know if you've seen those videos of like a giraffe being born, but like literally the second it's born, it can like run
Run.
around
Yeah.
and like get its own food. If you look at a human being can't do anything on its
True.
own, like it
Yeah.
literally, if you leave a human baby by
Yeah.
itself, it's going to die. It's not going to survive. It
Correct.
literally cannot even move. It can't even
Yeah.
lift its own neck by its
Yeah.
own. That's how helpless the human spirit is when it comes into this planet. And so a
Hmm.
lot of times our brains have created this framework where the first part of our life is all about creating these neurons, creating these
Hmm.
connections where
True.
we can just immediately learn, get on this learning pathway of, hey, I'm going to watch behavior. I'm going to learn it from my parents. I'm going to learn it from whoever. And then that's going to get stored in my brain. And so if
Yeah.
anything happens to you at that young of an age, a lot of the times that is stored into your brain.
Hmm.
Okay. And so the step after that comes to, you need to begin to heal your brain itself, not your mind. You need to heal
Hmm.
your brain, not the mind. Totally forget about your mindset. That's not
Hmm.
even important right now. It's all about your brain because your mind is in your brain. And unfortunately, what happens is people who experience psychological trauma, the issue, of course, there's an issue with their mind, but there it becomes a bigger issue with their brain. Their brain
Hmm.
becomes dysfunctional. It becomes highly inflammatory. If you do like a brain scan on it, it's
Hmm.
highly inflamed. It doesn't really work that well. Your neurotransmitters are all out of whack. That may impact different parts of your body. That may decrease your energy. That may decrease your neurotransmitters. And so what happens is people who have broken minds oftentimes have broken brains.
Hmm.
And so you need to look at the brain first. And so how do you look at the brain? You need to look at it like an organ.
Hmm.
And so the same way that like if you have a problem with your heart, you go to the cardio
Yeah.
doctor, the heart doctor, and he says, listen, Mark, you need to start exercising, bro. Like, we
Hmm.
now know that if you can't exercise, your heart is not going to be used and it's going to grow weak.
Yeah.
Hey, guess what? We know that, if you are eating, the wrong amounts of sugar with fat, that's going to increase cholesterol in your
Yeah.
heart and you're going to die. And
Yeah.
so you need to look at the brain from that same perspective. However, most of the healthcare industry, most of the education system, they
Hmm.
teach kids, they teach us nothing about how to take care of your brain.
Exactly.
And so luckily, a lot of the things that work for our physical body also work for our brain because
Hmm.
like a lot of people don't know that our first brain's function is actually to take care of our body. Our body is completely controlled
Yeah.
by our brain. And you notice people who have, Alzheimer's or
Hmm.
dementia, where
Hmm.
their brain is being destroyed, it's
Yeah.
degenerating. they are very slow. They can't really
True.
pick things up. They can't play
Yeah.
ping pong. And so the brain, its first responsible job is for the body. And so to take care of the brain, you have to take care of the body. And so that is
Interesting.
making sure you exercise. I think sleep is probably one of the most important things that that a lot of people don't understand. You know, the fact that like, you know, you can stay up all night and watch Netflix, or you can even stay up all night and do productive things, you know,
Yeah.
like code or like be an entrepreneur. These things literally destroy your brain. And like, I literally stayed up every single night for like the first 18 years of my life.
Wow.
And then now I sleep for 8 hours a day because I know how important it is. It's so important. You know, one of the last things that I'll say is that, you know, a key thing that controls your behavior in your life, obviously, is your brain, which we talked about. But what controls your brain are your neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters, these work with your neurons, these fire depending on the function. And there are many different kinds of neurotransmitters. You know, probably the most common one that people hear is like dopamine.
Yeah.
Another one is oxytocin.
Oxytocin. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the most important neurotransmitters, however, especially in terms of like mental health and social anxiety, is serotonin. And serotonin, it does a lot of things in our body.
Yep.
It regulates your mood. It regulates your appetite. It regulates your sexual desire. It regulates your sleep. And it regulates how you behave in social groups. And so serotonin is extremely important. And they actually found out that like 15 years ago, the most common assumption by most like scientists, doctors, researchers was that most serotonin is in your brain, right? Because it makes sense. It's a neurotransmitter. It's got to be in your brain.
Yeah.
They actually find out that that's wrong. Only 5 to 10% of serotonin is in your brain. 90 to 95% of serotonin is in this thing in your body called the gut microbiome, which is this ecosystem between your intestines and your stomach, where literally trillions of bacteria have been living ever since you were born, that you got from your mom, that when she was breastfeeding you, she was giving you bacteria, that whenever you put something in your body and you chew it and you digest it, your gut microbiome actually chews that first, and then it gives it off to your stomach to consume. And so actually in the chapter of my book where I talk about the fact where, you know, I really struggled and I kind of fell down my rock bottom and I became suicidal for the first time in my life. That chapter is called First My Gut Broke and Then My Brain Broke. And they've actually showed many studies where if your gut microbiome is experiencing inflammation due to chronic stress, probably the biggest one is not the right food choices, then that immediately connects to your mental health and your brain. And yet a lot of us, especially here in America, are just told to like, hey, eat whatever, you know, whatever fast food. And now people obviously know that like if you do that, you're going to be obese, you're going to have diabetes, you're going to have heart disease. But unfortunately, what a lot of people don't understand is that, like, you know, for example, dementia, what I just mentioned, the disease where your brain degenerates.
Yeah.
In America, they're now calling that type 3 diabetes. And that's because the same modulator, insulin, that if someone eats too many sugary sweets, they can get diabetes. They actually found out it works the same exact way with your brain. If your insulin and your blood glucose is constantly firing because you're eating ice cream, junk food, brownies, that will eventually cause your brain to rot, become inflamed, and die. And so the other piece of food and health is very much mental health. And so that's a major part of my book too. You know, if someone is experiencing mental health problems, I think one of the easiest things that someone can do is to look at their neurotransmitters. Because a lot of the times, like, even if you give somebody the best book in the world that tells them how to, like, you know, redo their mindset, or they listen to a podcast, if you actually get someone who actually has mental health problems, that's not going to do anything to them. Sure, they may listen to it, they may be able to improve maybe 1%, but if there's a problem that is happening in their hardware, the beneath the surface biochemistry, not much is going to change long term. And so for me, when I began to look at my biochemistry by changing my gut microbiome, by mostly through how I eat, exercise, making sure that I lower my stress, sleep, that's like a major layer, a major step that someone can do. And if you do that and you also face social anxiety, you will realize that your social anxiety goes from like maybe like 95% controlling your life to like maybe 50% or 40%. And then what happens is then you can begin to work on your mind. You know, you work on your brain first because that's the foundation. And then you work on your mind, and then you see a much, much accelerated, long-lasting change that's not just you like trying something for a month and then going back. And then no, you have to start out with food. And honestly, every single successful person who I've talked to, they are all somewhat mindful of what goes in their mouth, because that is literally what your body and brain uses to replenish your cells after they go away. And so that's extremely important. And then the last thing that I'll say on that is like, there's no such thing as universal healthy diet. There's no such thing as telling people that everyone should be vegan or everyone should go on keto or everyone should go on whatever diet. The truth is, there's no such thing as a universal healthy diet. But the one universal healthy diet that we do know of is natural foods that are not artificial, that have not come from a factory, that were not created by Nabisco or General Mills, Doritos, Oreos. All that stuff is crap for you. All that stuff, when you eat it, like you may be able to do that as a kid, or you may as a young adult be able to do that and just like, oh, I'm not going to eat this so I don't get fat. For me, it's all about the brain. I don't eat certain foods because it's all about my brain. I don't really care about my body, but the brain is where it's at. So that's the perspective that I would want to give people, especially entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the part wherein, I never knew that serotonin, most of that stays in the gut. I always believe that it's in the brain, but that's a really interesting thing that I've learned personally today. And the fact that you're hitting the root and the fact that you're hitting the root of the problem, right, rather than trying to fix it using a band-aid is also very important, because once we understand what the root cause is when we will be able to actually work on ourselves that actually sustains for a longer time, rather than just putting a band-aid and trying to recover it. Makes sense.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and like this is honestly the skill that I've learned from being a podcast host. Like people listen to my podcast not because it's like, the best edited or the best produced or like I'm some famous person or whatever. It's just because I'm real with people. And one of the things that I've learned from being a host is like, I don't want to waste people's time. I don't want to talk just for the sake of talking. I don't want to post something just for the sake of posting. I want to talk about stuff in a way that maybe people have never heard before, or stuff that just doesn't waste people's time, that gets them to the root cause. And so, like, as a podcast host, I've sat in front of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And as an entrepreneur, I've sat in front of thousands of people. Some of them have told me awesome, useful stuff, and some of them have told me crap. Some of them have told me BS. And so I think it's a great skill as a podcast host, as someone that people can trust, to be a trustworthy person, to say like, hey, I'm going to talk to these people and we're going to explore the root. And if you do that, you're going to have a very successful podcast because people are going to trust you.
Makes
so
sense.
That's the main thing too, from a different like meta perspective as well.
True. Now, you also take part, the first part that obviously you take care of is the mental health, wherein you're spreading more awareness about mental health, social anxiety, amazing stuff there. But you also have, you're doing amazing work at the other areas of life, which is, teaching people how to build personal brand. It could be on LinkedIn, different platforms, starting their own business. Now, for people who want to build their own personal brand, right? It could be on any platform. You can just give some 2 or let's say 3 tips for people who want to build their own personal brand in different platforms and who want to become successful. What your advice will be for them? How can they build a personal brand?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say first off, you need to figure out why. Why do you want to do something? And what I mean is like, I remember when I was a kid and someone, I remember I was like really into coding on the computer. I was making apps, websites, things like that at a young age. And I remember like I would like get offered to take some free class, some free course on coding. And I would take it and I would be like, oh, this is so awesome. This is so fun. I'm learning so much. But then like a week, I would just give up. And it wasn't because I wasn't focused. It's not because I had the discipline. It's just because I didn't know why I was learning this language in the first place. And so I think the most important step for anyone to really do anything is to really figure out like, why do you want to do this for a reason that's true to you? If you're on YouTube and you're watching a Gary Vee video and he's talking about starting a personal brand, you're like, I got to start a personal brand. I got to do it. I got to like make a TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all this stuff. I mean, you're probably going to give up after like a month.
Exactly.
You're probably not going to last. And so I think it's all about like, what are the real legitimate reasons as to why you want to start a personal brand? And so personally for me, that was like, I was, before I started talking about mental health, I was more known as like an entrepreneur, but I was like, I don't want to talk about entrepreneurship all the time. I think there are more important things for that.
Exactly.
And so part of my brand was like, I want to give a platform to things that are more important, to things that I really want people to learn and benefit from. And then also be able to become a key player in my industry so that maybe 10, 20 years down the road, when I'm like 32 or 42, maybe I can get to a spot where I can collaborate with either governments or the top industries that are actually changing the world. And so there's many different reasons, but find out your reason. Number 2 is set up the right systems behind it. And what I mean is like, I think it's much, much easier for someone to say like, hey, I'm going to build up my LinkedIn rather than saying I'm going to build my LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, podcast. And so I would say obviously this depends on your resources. It depends on if you're doing it by yourself or if you have your team. But I would say to start off slowly with one system, like for example, LinkedIn or podcasting, and just triple down on those. Do really well. And then as you grow, then you can take a more omni-channel approach where you're in many different spots at the same time. And then honestly, what I would say is like, I think the last 3 months in the world, at least I don't know about India, but at least in America, just across the board, regardless of industry, I think it's really shown us that there is no leadership in our country. And obviously there are a lot of great leaders for sure. But I think our society in general has gotten to a point where we made a lot of assumptions around, this person is a leader because they're in this part of the government, or this person's a leader because they have this title at this company. But then you really see what happens, like when crap hits the fan and there are actual problems, you see how a lot of these leaders are not even leading and they're acting very defensive and so on and so forth. Again, at least in America, I don't know about India, but I think this has really cued us, and it's really created the greatest opportunity in history for true leadership.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're able to have some sort of a leadership position, and that doesn't have to be like some formal position. Being a leader means that, you're not afraid of what other people say. Being a leader means that you say what everybody else is thinking, but is too afraid to say. Being a leader is not having all the answers, but being able to clearly communicate with people that you don't have all the answers and need to come up with a new solution together.
Yeah.
And so whether you are leading having your own business or you don't, being a leader in some way, some shape, some form is going to really change. If you're able to be a leader for someone now on social media or for a podcast or be a source of support for them, I mean, 10 years from now, they're still going to think about you in your heart. And so that's what I would say. And so
Makes sense.
Figure out why you want to be doing it, figure out the systems and start off as small as possible and work your way up. And then in every single thing that you do, try to find a way to speak on leadership, and it's not the fact that you want to get known as some CEO leader that's being so awesome and cool. but it's just like, when you're able to give value to other people, when you're able to educate others, when you're able to support, entertain them, that's what it means to be a human being.
Exactly.
And in a world where, on social media, a lot of people are not doing that. And if you're able to do that, that can definitely take you a long way, but it's definitely hard. So that's
definitely.
what I say.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you also interview a lot of unique and basically leaders from across the globe, basically, right? You've interviewed people, or you've spoken to people with people like Seth Godin on your podcast. You've interacted with Jay Shetty, Vishen over LinkedIn, multiple people, right? Now, what has been your learning from these great leaders? Any pattern that you've observed that has made them truly successful that my listeners can also understand and try to implement in their lives so that they could be successful?
Yeah. It's such a good question. I think the biggest one is, I remember, when I was just starting to interview all these people and stuff, I remember I was so nervous to interview them. And, part of me being nervous like that was because I thought that they were better than me. And I thought they were better than me because, you go on social media, go on their website, they have like this perfect brand. They have like this perfect, personality, identity.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the biggest thing was just realizing that all these people have problems. Like for me, when I got to sit down with Jay Shetty in New York City for like over an hour, and him telling me like off camera that he sometimes gets shy too if he's not like speaking at an event and he just like gets invited there, whether they say it on camera, on air or not, has really just led me that there's no such thing as a perfect person. And even if I still have anxiety, even if I'm still nervous, even if I still feel like I can't do this, that doesn't separate anything from my value, And so being able to go through that has been a real superpower, because whenever, I'm about to do something and I'm nervous, I'm confident, instead of asking myself like, oh, Mark, you're so stupid, why are you doing this? I'm like, no, I'm just a human being. Literally everyone has these same issues, and it's just a matter of becoming aware of it and then managing it. And so that's like a meta pattern that I have picked up that has been extremely valuable for my life, of like all of these people, from professional athletes to billionaires to Jay Shetty to all these people, they all still have problems. They all still have faults. And so when you understand that, it gives you permission to accept and forgive your own faults, your own mistakes, your own issues.
Awesome.
And move on and do it.
Makes sense. One last question, Mark, before, since I know we're coming to the end of the interview. What do you think is the purpose of life?
I would say two things. One, the purpose of life is whatever someone defines it as. I'm very much a spiritual person, but I'm also a realist in the sense of, I think if someone doesn't have a purpose and they ask themselves, oh, what's the purpose of life? This is so stupid. Then they're going to think that life has no purpose. But if they can create it, then they're going to realize that life has purpose, because they themselves have purpose within them. And the second thing that I would say is that, I personally think that Earth is just a training ground for all of us, for all of our soul spirits, to constantly improve, learn, so that we can get to the next dimension, the next level, the next layer. And actually, I was on a phone call this morning with a friend of mine, and she told me that, every time like someone pisses you off, anytime someone triggers you, they are sent by your spirit to teach you a lesson. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I don't know if that's true or not, but when you look at it from that perspective, it's like literally like every problem has been created by you, for you, in order for you to become the person who you've meant to be. And so literally this helps me understand that literally every single problem in my life is the exact problem that's supposed to be in my life right now, for me to become the person who I'm going to be tomorrow.
Makes sense. Awesome. Mark, those are some great advices, and I'm sure listeners who are going to be listening to our interview will definitely benefit a lot, both in terms of mental health as well as how they can build their own personal brand. So, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us on the Growth Mindset podcast.
Of course, man. You're the best. This was a terrific interview. You're a
Thank
great
you so
host.
much.